Chapter 8. Darius knew it. Asher's been working against him. There had to have been some kind of magic bullshit making all these plants grow back so quickly. By the time Darius gets back outside, it looks like he hasn't cut away anything at all. Shrubs coat the ground, entangling themselves in each other. Vines wrap around newly sprouted saplings, suffocating them, and Darius can hear the creaking and groaning as they all struggle to grow. That's it. His smithy is going to be filled with the fire of the forge anyway. Might as well burn the shit out of this place. He heads inside for the night, thinking of how on and on he's going to manage a controlled burn in this place. He doesn't want his house to burn down after all, and he doesn't want to get on Asher's bad side more than he already is by starting a forest fire. He may not have the ability to cut down the entire area before the plant matter grows back, but he could certainly get a border around it clear enough to let a fire burn over the rest without spreading. The next day, his muscles still sore and aching, Darius steps outside. The end of his shovel gripped in a tight fist, he plunges it into the mass of stems and branches curled around each other at his door. If he tries to rest, if he waits any longer, the situation will only get worse. Once again finding the area where his old smithy had been, he starts clearing away a border around it, gradually thickening it as the relentless sun shines on above him. He shuffles away the torn plant matter, occasionally stooping down to grip long tendrils of it with his hands to tear them away and toss them aside. By the time he's gotten a border cleared out to a few feet's width, his hands are stained green, and sweat's dripping down his face. The only thing left is to light it up. Working as fast as his shaky hands will allow, Darius finds some of the drier branches and gets to work, running the shovel against them to create thin shavings of bark. He deposits them in the middle of the area, atop all the other plants. Then he gathers some dried grasses and lays them around the shavings. Finally, he grabs his matchbox from his coat and strikes a match, relishing the pleasant ripping sound of the tip of the match against the side of the box. He carefully cultivates the fire, lighting one of the thinner shavings and shielding it from the wind with his hands, gently blowing on it. The flame spreads eagerly. Standing back, Darius watches as tongues of flame flick up and up, growing in size as the fire spreads. Leaves curl away as the fire approaches, flinching back before the approaching light consumes them. Though Darius doesn't entirely understand Asher's magic, he knows that Asher somehow has a connection to this world, and he desperately hopes that Asher can feel this right now. When the heat gets to be too much, Darius staggers back to his house and sets his shovel down outside against the wall, nestled in the vines coating his house, hoping that those vines won't grow over the shovel in the meantime. He keeps an eye on the looming, brightening fire, ready to smother any part of it that gets too close to the house or to the surrounding forest. Luckily, it goes off without a hitch, and as Darius watches the dying flames sink down, he notices something peculiar. There's still something green in there. Eyes wide, gripping his shovel, Darius jogs forward and peers down at the survivors. Thick, long, ropey vines, the very same ones that cover his house. Even their little purple flowers sit untouched, cradled in the muted, licking flames. Darius screams. He lets all his anger go in one ragged, primal scream, pushing it out from his gut, both his throat and ears starting to sting. He rears up with the shovel and plunges it into the thickest portion of the vines, then lifts it up, then slams it down, over and over, screaming whenever he gets the chance to breathe. His blood roars in his ears as he watches the greenery beneath him blur and splatter into a mess. Then, finally, he plunges the shovel into the ground and stumbles back, losing his balance and running backward until he slams his back against the wall of his house behind himself. The forest is quiet again, and all he has to show for it is some scorched ground, a pile of vine cuttings, a sore throat, and sweat. He lowers his head. He can feel his breath against his lips. He can't seem to get enough of it. The air's too humid to ever feel like he's not suffocating. A sound splits the silence, a large thump somewhere nearby. Darius closes his eyes. The last thing he needs is something to investigate. Leaves crunch under footfalls. Darius knows who it is from the gate alone. He was wrong. The last thing he needs is Asher showing up. Asher barrels around the corner of Darius's house, flapping his massive white wings to keep himself from falling over with his speed. He looks haggard, leaves caught between his feathers, eyes wide, panting heavily as he approaches Darius. He stops to glance between Darius and the scorched ground just a few meters away, then settles his gaze on Darius. "Are you okay?" Darius grits his teeth. "No, I am not okay," he growls. He gestures to the remnants of the fire. "I'm stuck on a world where even the goddamn plants are fireproof. Why are you doing this to me? Is it not enough that I can't go home, that you've tortured me for so long? Do you really have to sabotage my efforts here, too? I don't care that you're not going to help, but couldn't you at least leave me alone?" As Darius speaks, the feathers on Asher's wings raise up, making them look bigger. Darius could go on longer, but Asher interrupts him. "Do you have any idea how insulting it is when you say that something that naturally happens in my world is just me trying to sabotage you?" Asher screams, his voice cracking. The two of them lock eyes. Darius's eyes almost hurt looking into Asher's. They're so bright. "This is bullshit," Darius growls, turning away from Asher. Hearing footsteps, he glances back to see Asher heading toward the shredded vines. His wings flare out a bit as he stoops down to pick one up, turning it over in his palm. "I put this willow bane here for a reason," Asher says slowly. He looks up at Darius, then past him to the house. "While we were building your house and your first smithy, we needed something to keep the plant life held at bay. That's what this was, the border that kept the other plants from growing here. And after everything was built, it grew over your house to protect it from the forge." Asher lets the vine fall from his hands. It lands in the pile at his bare feet and kicks up a plume of ash. Darius doesn't even remember that. It's so difficult to remember that point in his life, when the memory of his crime was fresh in his mind and his sole focus was making sure that none of these strange people in this strange new world suspected him. He knew that Asher had been nice to him, but he doesn't remember the specifics. There are moments, pounding a nail into fresh-cut wood, looking over an area that would become his first smithy on Anah, carefully handling a crucible with his tongs as he slid it into the forge. But it's all fuzzy, all disjointed, and he certainly doesn't remember any plant-related troubles or solutions during the time between when this was a rough patch of forest and when this became his house. Darius startles back as Asher's wings unfurl and flap, sending a strong gust of wind that presses Darius's clothes against his body and makes the end of his coat flare out behind him. Asher uses the momentum and a few more flaps to hop up to Darius's roof. He squats down on it, facing away from Darius, rather bird-like as he adjusts his wings for balance. "What do I need to do?" Darius asks. "How did you use that vine to keep the other plants at bay?" For a moment, Asher doesn't answer, and Darius isn't sure whether or not he heard him. Then, without moving, Asher speaks. "You'll need to build a trellis," he says. "Something that won't last forever. Maybe wood. That's what I did. Make it about twice as large as the area you need cleared, maybe a little smaller. Then you weave the willow bane through it. Then you let it grow for a bit, maybe a couple days. Then you torch the inside of it. Trim the willow bane back as needed while you're building, and eventually it'll learn to use its energy to push outside your structure, not in." Asher's words are surprisingly monotone while he explains this. Darius listens attentively, but his excitement gets in the way of his retention. "A trellis?" he asks. Big as my smithy?" "Bigger," Asher says. "However large you need it to be to build your smithy." Wings spread out, Asher stands up, then hops down from the roof, stumbling forward. He trots to the edge of the forest, glancing around. "Let's go get some branches." Okay." Darius follows Asher, who ignores him as he starts inspecting branches, tearing a few similarly sized limbs from trees. Hesitantly, Darius follows suit, trying to pick straight, maneuverable branches that would make for good construction. "Asher?" he asks. You said you weren't going to help me at all. Mm-hmm, Asher says softly. You don't have to do this, Darius says, slightly afraid of what sorts of consequences he might face for Asher's help. Asher doesn't respond. Really, you don't have to, Darius says. Asher doesn't respond. End of chapter 8.